Welcome to another episode of Gwinnett County Public Library's Introduction to Python series. We are on episode 4 now. We are going to jump right in. So I have Replit on the screen. And where we left off in episode 3 was, we worked on lists. We did talk about for loops briefly, and the example we used with a for loop, I'll go ahead and write that in a second, but in today's episode, what we're going to do, we're going to work on for loops, we're going to talk about while loops, and we'll finish with importing modules and functions as well. So just to recap, in episode 3, I created a group which was a list, and I just did a list of names, and I believe, if I remember correctly, the names I used were, Ronnie, Bobby, Ricky, and Mike, and then we also threw Ralph in there, because why not? So we have a list of 5 names, and we put those in a for loop. So I'm going to go for name in group print name. And now I'm going to run it. And there we go. So on the right side of our screen, we'll see Ronnie, Bobby, Ricky, and Mike, and then Ralph. And what happened here with the for loop, if we go back and look at the code, name is a temporary variable. We could call it whatever we wanted. We could call it X if we wanted to, but if we called it X, we would have to print X here, but it's temporary. It really doesn't matter what you name that. And so the way the for loop works is for X in group, print X. So X is going to be Ronnie on the first iteration, and then it prints Ronnie, because that's what we're saying, print. And then the for loop is going to go back up, for X in group, X is Bobby, print X, which is Bobby. Then it's going to go back up to Ricky, print Ricky, Mike, print Mike, and then print Ralph. But then that's the end of the list, so the for loop is done. So that's how you use a for loop to iterate through a list. Another neat thing you can do with a for loop, and we're just going to delete our friends here, Ronnie, Bobby, Ricky, and Mike, is I can do for, and again, this is going to be a temporary variable, say for num in range. And range is a keyword, and in my parentheses, I'm going to put a range of numbers. So let's say I want to create a range of 1 to 100. So I'm going to type in 1, which is where I want it to start, and then I'm going to put 100, and you'll see what happens when I put 100. Okay, and remember, you have to put a colon at the end there, and then everything that the for loop's gonna run has to be indented. So we're just gonna print the number. So print num, and we're going to run it. Now look what happens. So since we're printing num, because num is going to be, it's going to start with 1, and then it's going to be 2, then it's going to be 3, then it's going to be 4, all the way up to what we think will be 100. But if you look on the right side of the screen, I'm going to scroll down, it actually goes to 99. So if you want it to print out a number, like we want to finish at 100, we actually have to do +1, so 101, okay? Now we run it, and you'll see that it ends with 100. So this is just a way to control how many times you want to loop through something. Now in this case, we just want to print out what number is, but it doesn't have to be um, for the purpose of printing out every number in a range, because this is just telling the for loop, hey, I want you to run 100 times. So I can put print, and we'll put GCPL is awesome. Okay. And now if I run it, GCPL is awesome is going to be printed 100 times. So range is just a way to control how many times you want to iterate through the loop. Okay. So that's something you can do with the for loop. Now I want to get into while loops. So a while loop is going to go on forever. So it's like a for loop, except for it doesn't have a stopping point in a range or in a list, for example. This is going to run forever until it meets a condition to stop. So we use some logic in this, similar to with if statements. And if you want to go back and look at if statements, you can go back to episode 1 for some examples. But to create a while loop, I'm going to type in while, which is the keyword. And, well, let's start with this. Let's do an example. So one of the things I used to do when I was a kid, and this was based off a cartoon, but whenever I'd go on a road trip with my parents, I always did the "Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet?" You know, kind of as a joke, not really serious, because that's exhausting to ask that many times. But let's use that as an example, where I am going to ask, "Are we there yet?" until we're there yet. So every time the answer is no, or anything but yes, I'm just going to keep asking, right? So I'm going to create a variable called arrival. And I'm going to set arrival to false. Now I believe this is the first time we've talked about booleans. What a boolean is, it's a value where it's either true or false. And notice that with false, I did a capital F. It's not a lowercase. So false and true have to be capitalized, that first letter. So right now my code, let me go ahead and clear the right side of my screen, because we already know GCPL is awesome. Okay. So I'm going to say while arrival equal, see, it already looks like an if statement, right? While arrival equal false colon, what do we want to do? Okay, so I'm going to ask my wonderful parents, are we there yet? So I'm going to use response as the variable, just to be consistent with my previous videos. And this is going to be user input. And what do we want to present to the user? Are we there yet? Okay, and we want that in quotes because it's a string. Now look what happens if I run it. Run. Are we there yet? No. 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 So it's going to go on forever. That's what I was talking about, that a while loop will go on forever until a condition is met. So what do we need to do to make it stop? This is where we're going to get into an if statement again. So we have response equals input, are we there yet? So I'm going to say if response equal yes colon print awesome. Okay. So now we're going to say if arrival is false, we're not there yet. I'm going to ask, are we there yet? If the response is yes, it's going to print awesome. But if it's anything but yes, I'm just going to ask, are we there yet again? So let's run it. Are we there yet? Nope. Are we there yet? Nope. Are we there yet? Stop asking. Are we there yet? Please stop. Are we there yet? No. Are we there yet? Yes. And you see that awesome prints out. But are we there yet is then presented. Why? Well, because the way the while loop works, we start with the response, the input, then we have our logic, but once the logic is done, it's just going to go back up to the top because arrival equals false. So just think of it as we run through the code and then while arrival equals false, is it false? It's still false. So now what we need to do is change the value of arrival to true. So we can do that by in the same if statement with if the response is yes and we print awesome, I can now change arrival equal to true. Okay. Now we're going to run it. Are we there yet? No, 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 yes. Awesome. So pretty neat, right? And what happens is after it prints awesome, arrival becomes true. We get back to the while, right? While arrival equals false. Well, it's now true, so it stops. Now another thing we can do to break out of a while loop is rather than saying arrival equals true, we can type in break. And then run. No, no, yes. And there we go. It breaks. But sometimes using break is okay. Other times arrival equals true would be better because then say you're continuing this story and you arrive, then you don't want to revert back to false once it breaks. Okay, so let's do another example of a while loop. And I'm going to introduce the random module that we're going to import. And what modules are is just think of it as code that somebody else has already created that you can tap into, okay? So if I import random, the random module, it's going to give me access to a lot of cool stuff that somebody's already created to give me like random numbers, random choices, things like that. So I don't have to code that. I don't have to reinvent the wheel. So I'm just going to comment out what we've done, and I'm going to do multiple lines. So I'm going to do quote, 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 and now all that's ignored, right? If I hit run, nothing happens. Okay, so I'm going to import random, and that's how you use, you bring random into, or any module into your code. And the only reason why I have a squiggly line is because it's saying that I've imported random, but I haven't used it. So let me show you how to create a random number. This is going to be very useful. I can say, I'm just going to call this variable random underscore num, and I'm going to set the value to random period rand int, open parentheses, and I want a random number between 1 and 20. And now I'm going to print random num. Okay, so what happened here? So random num equals random period rand int. Well, rand int belongs to the random module. And to tap into it, we have to type in random before it. Random period rand int. And that's so it knows that it's coming from random. If I take away random, rand int 120, and I run it, we're going to get an error. Rand int is not defined. Because looking for a function, rand int, that doesn't exist. That function is in random. Now there's other ways to import modules that we'll get into in other episodes. But there's a lot of cool things you can do. Alright, but for this example we have our random number. We're going to run, and it gives me a 1. Because we want a random number between 1 and 20. So run, 13, run, 9, run, bingo, right? So we have a random number. So now what we can do is create a number guessing game if we want to. And we'll use a while loop just to continue to practice while loops while we're on our Python journey. So rather than print random number, I'm going to say while. Well, let's do this. Since it's a game, we'll say we have to create a Boolean value if the game is over, right? So we'll say game over. This will be a variable, and we'll say false because the game is not over. And we'll say while game over equal false. Okay. And so while it's false, what do we want to do? We want to ask the user to guess the secret number. I'm just going to use response as my variable. Response input. What is the secret number? Okay. And so the user is going to guess the secret number. And this is where we can put some logic. We say if response. Actually, let's instead of response, let's just do guess to represent the player's guess. This just makes the logic sound more like how we would normally talk, right? So if guess equal random num print you win. Awesome. All right. So what is the logic? If game over equals false, which it is, ask the user what the secret number is. If their guess is equal to that random number, we're going to print you win. Awesome. But then we also have to change that Boolean value. So I can say game over is now equal to true. Okay. Let's see how this runs. Now I want you to see what happens when we run it. What is the secret number? I'm going to say 8. What is the secret number? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is very tedious, right? 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, and we actually went through 20, right? So already we have a bug here, right? Because I went 1 through 20 and it still doesn't equal the random number. So what's going on? Well, when you use user input, when you get input from the user, that's going to be a string, okay? And our random number is an integer. So based on the way our code is written, input if I type in 8, it's going to look like this. It's going to come out like a string, 8. Now, the random number, let's say it was 8, would be like that, right? Because an integer doesn't have quotes around it. A string has quotes around it. So those are never going to equal. So we have to make sure that the user input is an integer, and we can fix that by going to our guess variable, and we'll say right in front of input int, open parentheses, close parentheses. And now what this is going to do is anything that the user types in is going to be converted to an integer. So let's run it. What's the secret number? 1. Hey, first guess. All right, but just to show that it runs, let's get some try agains first. 2, 3, 4. Okay, so this time the secret number was 4. So you win. Awesome. Now this can be a little tedious. I want to give the user a hint if their guess is higher or lower than the secret number. So again, we can use some if statements. So we already have if guess equal to random number, you win. But let's do an else if. So elif, and I believe this is the first time we're getting into something other than equal to or not equal to with if statements, but check out what we can do. We can bring some something that may be familiar to you from math. So we can say elif guess less than, some of us know those as the alligator mouths, right? Alligator mouth to the right, alligator mouth to the left. But elif guess is less than random num. That's going to be our condition. We're going to print too low. Try again. Well, let's say guess is too low. All right, guess is too low. Try again. And let's do another else if. Elif guess greater than alligator mouth to the left, random num, print guess is too high. Try again, my friend. All right. So let's take a look at this. While game over equals false, which is going to be false until we get this, until the guess is equal to random number, where we print you win and game over becomes true. But then we have else ifs, so other conditions. If the guess is too low, we say the guess is too low. Try again. If it's too high, we say the guess is too high. Try again, my friend. So let's run it. What is the secret number? 6. Guess is too low. Try again. So we want to go higher. So we'll say 10. Guess is too low. 15. All right. So we know that the too low works, but let's just test it, make sure too high works. So what is the secret number? I'm going to say 20. Guess is too high. Try again, my friend. 15. Guess is too low. Try again. 18. 17. So it has to be 16. You win. Awesome. So that's how you can use some if statements with a while loop. Now we're going to have a little bit more fun with random, and we're going to create, we're just going to have it function like a dice. So I'm just going to comment out what we just did. Now actually pause the video, and what I want you to do is print out a random number between 1 and 6. This will be like rolling a dice. Just a normal 6-sided dice. So pause it and do that. Excellent. I knew you could do it. All right. So it could be pretty simple. Let's do roll equals random dot rand int, and say lowest value is a 1, highest value is a 6, and then print that roll. Print, and it prints out a 1, a 6, a 2. And if we want to make it fancy, we can use some concatenation, right? In our print statement, I can say you rolled a, and then plus roll, run, and we get that error, right? So how do we fix this? We already ran into this when we were comparing a string with an integer, but with concatenation you have to make sure that you are adding a string with another string. You can't add a string to an integer. So roll is going to be an integer, so we need to convert this to a string, and I'm just going to do that within the print statement by putting parentheses around roll. Now we're going to run it, and we still get an error. What are we missing? Need my closing parentheses. Cool. All right, run. You rolled a 6. You rolled a 1. You rolled a 6. So this is pretty cool. We're simulating a die roll. Let's say we wanted this to be in a game, for example, or just our program in general. But we don't want to have to type this over and over and over again every single time we want to roll a dice. We can create a function which allows you to easily run code on demand when you call the function. So what we're going to do is I'm going to delete what we just did. Actually, no, I won't delete it. We'll use it. So I want to create a function, and when you create a function, you define it. So you have to use def space. And I'm going to call this def, and we'll just call it roll. And we have to put open close parentheses. And I'll get into what goes into those parentheses, which is optional, but I'll get into that in a second. So roll, and then what's part of this roll function? I'm just going to copy what we had here. I guess I'll cut it and paste it down here. Got to make sure that print line lines up. Indentation is important. So part of this roll function now, when I call the roll function, roll is going to equal a random number between 1 and 6, and then it's going to print you rolled a. So we're going to run. Now notice that nothing happens. And that's because we haven't called this function. That's another thing that makes functions so powerful is when your code runs, just think of it as skipping over it. But it's not necessarily skipping, it's now aware that that roll function exists, but it's not going to run on like when we run the program. So in order to do that, on the right side of my screen, I can type in roll, open close parentheses, so I can call this function, and now it says you rolled a 2. You rolled a 1. So I can access this roll function on demand. Now, if I wanted a roll to happen within my code, I could also call it in my code. I'm just going to clear over here. So now notice where I put my cursor. It's lined up with the define, okay? Because this is outside of the function. If I want to run this function, if I want to call it, just do roll, open close parentheses, roll, roll. Let's say we want to do it 3 times. There we go. Now we're going to run it. And notice that on the right side, if you rolled a 1, you rolled a 6, you rolled a 5. Now, that's repetitive. So if we can now leverage a for loop, let's say we wanted to roll a dice 10 times, we could actually put this in a for loop if we wanted to. Remember how we did range for the for loop? We can do for no, we'll say for what do we want to call this? We'll call it yeah, why not? For num in range. How many times do we want to roll the dice? Let's say 1. Or let's see, we'll start there and we'll say 11. We want to roll the dice 10 times, colon. Now what I can do is roll. There we go. So with these 2 lines, with just a simple for loop, for num in range 1 to 11, right? 10 plus 1, roll. So call this. So if I run it, you rolled a 6, you rolled a 2, you rolled a 6, you rolled a 5, you rolled a 2, you rolled a 5, etc. And it just keeps going, right? Until we get those 10 rolls. So that's how you can use for loops with the roll. Now, what goes in the parentheses with a function? So this is where we can set our parameters, and just think of parameters also like a placeholder, temporary variable. And I'm going to go ahead and delete this for loop for now. And we're going to modify our roll, because not all dice have 6 sides. Sometimes dice have 20 sides or 12 sides or 8 sides. So rather than create a function for each of these different die rolls, like for example, if you want to do this the long way, we could do, DEF roll 20, open close parentheses, and then we're just going to copy this, print, and then instead of the 6 in rand int, I'm going to say 20. And then I'm going to run it. And if I wanted to roll a 20-sided dice, I could say roll underscore 20, because that's the name of our function, and it works. Now this is perfectly fine, but it's just more than we need. We could simplify this. So rather than creating a roll function for a 20-sided dice, a 12-sided dice, an 8-sided dice, 4-sided dice, whatever, we can actually incorporate that in just our roll function. So in between these parentheses, I'm going to type in a parameter. I'm going to call it sides. And now in my roll function, instead of 6, I'm going to type in sides. So see how it functions like a variable? Sides, sides. So now when I run this function, I can do run, and I'll say roll, and then in the parentheses, how many sides does the dice have? So I'll say 20. You rolled an 8. Roll, let's say it's a 100-side dice. 100. You rolled a 19. Roll, let's do it again. 100. I want a number over 20 to prove a point. You rolled a 22. All right, cool. So that's a parameter. So pretty neat. We'll get into functions a little more in the next episode, but just to recap, we went over for loops, while loops, importing modules. In this case, we imported random, and we got that random value, and we created a simple function. So if you like what you see, be sure to subscribe to GCPL's YouTube page so you can get notified every single time we release a new episode, as well as other cool virtual programs. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. See you again next time.